Good evening. My name is Charlie Adkins, and I am this year's chair of the VIP Distinguished Speaker Series. The VIP Distinguished Speaker Series is one of the many programs put on by the Undergraduate Business Council for the Red McComb School of Business. Today, we are joined by Dean Thomas Gilligan, Dean of McComb School of Business, and Mr. Ravi Saligram, former President and CEO of OfficeMax. We will begin tonight with an interview between Dean Gilligan and Mr. Saligram. Then we will open the floor to Q&A from the audience. As a reminder, today's event will end promptly at 6:30 p.m. We would greatly appreciate if you could refrain from leaving early and using your electronic devices. Ravi Saligram's 35-year career includes 3 years as President and CEO of OfficeMax and more than 20 years of general management experience at Aramark, Intercontinental Hotels Group, and SC Johnson. Considered an inspirational and visionary leader, he is noted for his ability to grow global businesses and brands. While at OfficeMax, Mr. Saligram recruited a world-class management team and transformed the company from an office products distributor to an omni-channel provider of workplace products, services, and solutions. To accelerate transformation, an historic merger with OfficeMax was announced in February 2013 and consummated in November 2013. Adjusting for a special dividend, the share price at merger close had more than tripled since the launch of Mr. Saligram's turnaround plan in 2011. Under his leadership, OfficeMax was the only office supply company to be named to Ethisphere's World Most Ethical Companies list for 2 consecutive years. Prior to joining OfficeMax, Mr. Saligram served as President of Aramark International and Executive Vice President and Chief Globalization Officer of Aramark Corporation. Prior to Aramark, Mr. Saligram held leadership positions within Intercontinental Hotels Group, including President of Brands and Franchise for North America, Chief Marketing Officer, and President, Asia Pacific, and held brand and general management roles within SC Johnson & Son, Inc. He began his career in advertising with Leo Burnett Company in Chicago, where he formed his relentless desire to meet and exceed customer needs. He is a board member of Church & Dwight, a consumer and specialty products company, a trustee for the Eisenhower Fellowships, a board member and on the executive committee of the National Retail Federation, and formerly served as board member and vice chairman of the World Affairs Council of Philadelphia and board member of OfficeMax Incorporated. Having lived in 5 countries and worked in many more across 5 continents, Mr. Saligram earned a Bachelor of Science degree in Electrical Engineering from Bangalore University in India and holds an MBA from the University of Michigan. Please help me welcome Dean Gilligan and Mr. Ravi Saligram.
Well, thanks, Charlie. Can you all hear me okay? Everything's fine? Great. Well, and welcome. Thank you all for coming out today. Ravi, impressive resume. We're glad you're here. Thank you for braving the cold climate of Austin. I know you came from Chicago. You were probably happy to get out of there, weren't you?
Tom, indeed. It's a heat wave for me here. So I was delighted that I could take my jacket off, coat off at the hotel. The weather, frankly, is lovely here. And, in Chicago, we've had 15 days of sub-zero temperatures in January alone, so highest record in 20 years. So this is absolutely delightful.
Well, that's outstanding. Well, again, thanks for being here. You've had such an impressive run as a business leader, and the last few jobs have been fantastic. But tell us something about your early career. What was your first job, maybe even as a child, and what were some of your early employment experiences?
Great, Tom. First of all, thank you all for inviting me, and it's a real pleasure and honor to be here. So let me start off with my first job was really at Leo Burnett and in Chicago, and it was I was about 21, and I didn't have a green card, and I'm sure some of your students here may empathize with, and of course you have to get a job to get a green card, and I got an offer from General Foods, but they said no, they wouldn't sponsor me. So Leo Burnett, I was seeing their presentations and people going in with apples, and being an impecunious student, I said, at least I'll get a free apple. But I was so impressed with them that got a job there. And it was really a great way for me to really understand and really become a marketer and really understand brands. And Burnett at that time was the best advertising agency. And not only that, it had a great corporate culture. Of course, the corporate culture was so good, which later on I reflected, they made you believe that working at Burnett was such a great thing that even though they paid you 50% less than every other agency, and you worked twice as hard, you believed that you were far superior to everybody else. So it was great. We all worked till midnight, and I remember doing, I was on the Nestle business, and the client said they had to do a media plan in a week. In those days, you didn't have computers and all of that. Everything was done by calculators. And normally, a media plan took 2 months. So my media director said, okay, Saligram, you're it. You've got to do it in a week. It's never been done. The client says, if you don't do it, you'll be fired. We'll be fired. So I worked 7 days and nights without any sleep, other than taking half an hour to shower in a conference room, and got it done. And client thought it was a decent enough media plan. We didn't get fired. So it was an interesting experience. But Leo Burnett really taught me something else, which was this thing where they emphasized this whole thing called POV, point of view. That you had to, even as a young associate, you had to have a point of view in everything. And you had to have the courage of your convictions to defend stuff. And so I was working on the Keebler business, and we had the whole campaign of elves. And the Keebler elves,
cookies, right?
Keebler cookies and crackers, and I'm sure some of you have seen the commercials of the hollow tree and stuff. And so the client, Nabisco, was the major competitor. And the brand managers of the client got tired of the Keebler elves because their own brand, whether it was Townhouse or Zesta or something, wouldn't get individual brand ads. It was all an umbrella ad campaign. And so they kept pushing for individual brand advertising. And we said, you just don't have the money. You have champagne taste, but beer money, and it doesn't work. This is the best thing. And they said, no, we're going to put you on notice, and in a week you have to come back and present to us a new campaign. So I was the account executive, and I did this whole point of view presentation. And they were expecting to see a new campaign. Instead, we went and presented a point of view saying the elves were the best thing for them. Halfway through, Chuck Shemley, the EVP of marketing, threw us out of the conference room and said they were going to terminate the account. So fortunately for us, the next day, P&G announced the launch of Duncan Hines cookies, and PepsiCo, I think, did another thing called Soft Batch, and so there was a whole cookie wars, and we were able to convince them that the Keebler elves were the best equity they had. So, lesson was sometimes better to be lucky than smart. So
if you're gonna go to a cookie war, get elves. Is that the lesson?
Yeah, that was no. I think having the courage of your convictions and hoping that you turn out to be lucky. So.
Yeah, is that a that's an interesting bit of advice for young people, right? Because there might be some cultures in which that independence of opinion and the strength in which you express it is not as welcomed as it might be at Leo Burnett.
Yeah, no, I think Burnett really, the whole emphasis there was learn your client, know your client's business better than the client themselves. And so we were really, we got into all the stuff, and therefore when we spoke, it was with great authority. In fact, Tom Garvin, at that time the CEO of the company, when we were making one of these things, offered me a job, in which I didn't go. But it was really about they trained young people, and because we had all come out and we're getting into the real world, to really speak up, but always based on facts. And so this whole thing about understanding the consumer and understanding the trends and saying, how do you then build the right strategies based on that consumer insight was a very critical thing.
Interesting. Now, your career has been meteoric, and you rose quickly, et cetera. What do you think about your character, your behavior, your personality, or your successes stood out so that people could promote you over your peers?
For me, Tom, one of the things was I never looked at it as a competition versus my peers, because I think when you get into that sort of a thing, it really gets to be a rat race. And the thing is always about win-win and trying to drive a whole philosophy where the team wins. And that's something I've subscribed throughout my career, is making your team look good rather than it's all about yourself. To me, it's been an interesting thing for me as I've driven my career, has been taking chances and calculated risks. So at SC Johnson, for instance, 60% of the sales of the company at that time, which was still in the late, in the 80s, as a brand manager, was international, which was very unusual. And so I knew you had to have an international assignment. And so somewhere in a washroom, I heard that the president of SC Johnson Korea had been fired. And so I said, I'm going to go after this job. I was the senior brand manager on the raid business. And I didn't even know where Korea was. All I knew was what I saw was MASH. And I didn't know that there was a North Korea and a South Korea. And so when I interviewed for the job, most of the people who interviewed were already marketing directors or general managers of other subs. And my boss asked me, he said, are you a jungle fighter? And I said, yes, not knowing what it was all about. But I didn't ask about the perks. I didn't ask about the expat package. All I knew was I wanted to be a general manager. And I had my interview on the job the day my second daughter was born. Oh, wow. And she was 3 weeks when we got on a plane and went to Korea. So it was taking those sorts of risks, and it was a troubled company. It was technically bankrupt, even though it was a wholly owned subsidiary. And over 4 years, it became the fastest growing subsidiary for Johnson in all of Asia Pacific, and we were named one of the 3 best foreign managed companies. It was a tough assignment. When I went there the first day, the executive committee people asked me, my team members said, how long does Johnson plan to colonize Korea? And this is after they've just got rid of their first ever Korean general manager. Yeah. And so it was, and a month later we had a factory fire where people had been getting rid of aerosols in a very bad way. And when I rushed over to the factory, all my management team said, well, we need to give out white envelopes. And I said, what do you mean? And they said, well, this has been a safety violation, and turned out those employees were temporary, and so they shouldn't have been hired. And so they wanted to give white envelopes to the police, the newspaper media, etc., to hush it all up. And I said...
so white envelopes are a bribe?
We're bribes, essentially, payments to shush them up. And I said, oh, my dead body. And they said, well, we can arrange for that too. So, this is the sort of thing that in business school it doesn't... I was 32 at that time, running a company for the first time. And how do you deal with it? And all you know is that it's wrong. And I said, absolutely not. And I said, the only thing we're going to do is go to the hospital to look at those 4 associates and make sure they're okay. And so I was resolute and didn't allow that. We got fined. And I realized that the safety standards in the factory were very poor. Right. And we did a whole modernization effort and so on. But it's for me, that was my first taste of international markets, and how it's so important that it's not about American values, it's about universal values. And that you've got to run and SC Johnson is a very ethical company. Yeah. And so to me, this is very important about not only great business results, but how you get results. So, so to me, the things, going back to your question about, hey, what were some of the distinguishing features, was taking those calculated risks. But I also think working for blue chip companies, whether it's SC Johnson, Leo Burnett, these were in the 100 best companies to work for in America. Even today, I think they are. Yeah. Aramark, which is a Fortune most admired company. Because when you go to those sorts of companies, you really learn. You learn about how to get things done, but how to get things done in a good way. And and then just getting different sectoral experiences, which has helped me be more of a transformational leader.
Yeah. What do you consider to be your greatest professional accomplishment?
For me, it's when I look at it in terms of one of my proudest things is all the people that I've worked with and seeing their success and how they've grown and developed. Tonice Paul, my first direct report, I just reconnected with her in Chicago. She had Leo Burnett. She was an assistant account executive. She and I worked on the Keebler business. Today, she's CEO of BBDO Energy and doing extremely well. Guy that worked for me, Peter Mann at Airmark, he's the CEO of a food company. Mm-hmm. So most everyone that has reported to me directly have gone up several roles. So that, to me, to see that professional growth. Of course, the other thing was, Korea Johnson was named as one of the 3 best foreign managed companies in Korea. Right. The team did it. And so, or Holiday Inns in Asia Pacific was named one of the 100 best companies to work for. For me, someone like Joan O'Shaughnessy in Ireland, who was my CEO there at Airmark, was named as one of the 5 most successful women in Ireland. Mm-hmm. Those sorts of things, that's what I take great pride in.
Yeah. Flip side of that, this is the embarrassing question, right? What's your greatest professional failure or mistake?
It's you make a number of mistakes as you go through your career, and you learn from them. I'll give you two examples. I'll go back to the Korean ones. And Korea had a very defining, because it was my first leadership and general management role. It was interesting going from here, and I wanted to hire a marketing director. And so I met this guy, and I'll disguise his name, Mr. Shim, I'll call him, not his real name. So this guy had gone to Oxford. He went to University of Michigan, spoke with a flawless British accent, and very handsome guy. And so I interviewed him, and I wanted to hire him right away. And I talked to my boss, and my boss, Tito Haddad, who was the head of Asia Pacific, Tito said, "Don't do it. This doesn't sound right. He's not going to work out for you." I said, "Tito, you're old-fashioned. What do you know? I need to upgrade the company." And the problem was, Mr. Shim turned out he wanted to be, he was regarded as a foreigner in the company. Mm-hmm. It was okay for me because I was an expat and people saw that, but he was Korean but not really Korean. And he hated being in Korea, and he just couldn't adjust. And so a great lesson for me is don't judge a book by its cover. Right. And in international markets, don't judge people by their English language ability. So, because you have very talented people who don't speak the best English, but are great talents. Yeah. So that was one quick one. And I'll tell you another quick one, which was...
So just to clarify that, so you had some prejudices or biases that caused you to value people differently than your colleagues would or others, and so get other people's information or think more deeply about what you actually need?
Yeah, I mean, your first tendency when you create management teams, and there's been a great lesson for me, which I've never repeated after that, is you want to get people who are like you. And because none of my people spoke good English when I went there, and I started learning Korean. So he was, the guy went to Michigan, he was Oxford, he had, so there's a great comfort. But the fact that he was really not a great marketer and didn't fit in the culture. Yeah. So I think you need to always say, hey, when you pick a team, pick people who are not necessarily like you, but complement your weaknesses as opposed to just doing comfort level.
Right. Got it. Interesting. I want to ask you a little bit about OfficeMax, and I want to kind of segment it up because you created a lot of value for shareholders and for society while you were there. I want to talk about what OfficeMax looked like when you got there and the initial strategies that you put in place and the success or failure of those. What was the first year like at OfficeMax?
So when I was brought in by the board to transform the company, it was number 3 in if you narrowly defined office products, but had a low share if you looked at a very broad view, because the industry itself is about $200 billion. Yeah. And
So the leaders are Staples?
Staples, Office Depot, and OfficeMax was number 3. But then you've got a lot of players like Walmart and Costco and stuff. And the thing is, when I joined since 2008 with the Great Recession, and this business, office products, is very heavily tied to the economy. Mm-hmm. It had been declining. For 5 years, we had lost more than $2 billion in revenue. Every year it was like -5, -6. And it had remained profitable, but barely. And so the question was, how do you ramp it up and how do you get it back on track? There was also, the whole industry was experiencing secular and cyclical declines. So one of the things that the plan we did was, first, the company was organized very functionally and had a real retail bias, because we had almost 1,000 stores, but we had a B2B business which is as big as the retail business. So I created 3 business units, went from a functional structure, created a B2B business, a digital business, which I saw was very important for the future, and then a retail business, and brought presidents to run those, so that I'd have individual champions running those. The other thing was changing the mindset, that it was looking at a lot of adjacencies, not thinking about just office products, but saying, how do you go from being a product distributor to really going into services, services and solutions. And the second was changing the customer target. We had very much focused on the individual consumer, and they really didn't spend, their average ticket was pretty low. The real heavy user, which after we did research, was really the small business customer. And of course, on the B2B side, the corporates. Right. But redefined our whole thing as, hey, it's the business customer. That's what we're really out there for. And the third was this retail bias to really going to more of a multi-channel business. So we embarked on that journey on saying, my first thing, and we also had a balance sheet that had a lot of issues. The optics were very poor. And we had a lot of non-recourse debt, which people didn't realize was non-recourse, so they thought we were very heavily leveraged. So I put a strategy of, number 1, reversing core business decline. Second was balance sheet optics. And third strategy was all about innovation and really leapfrog moves for the future. So that's how we started effecting the turnaround in 2012 and upgraded the talent, brought in some really great people from the outside. Because the culture in the company was, because we were number 3, there was always this that we can't win and that we could never attract great talent. But when I started bringing great people in, like Jim Barr, who was one of the top 5 people in the country in e-commerce. He was president of CS.com, the guy who launched Bing at Microsoft. Or Michael Lewis, who had run a $60 billion retail business at Walmart. When I started bringing people like that in, it also unleashed the talent within the company. All the people who were there realized they could go up, and we started driving a real performance-based culture. So all of these, now that we had a strategy, and then we put a lot of metrics so that we could measure things, and I started creating a whole tension of every month operating reviews so that we held people accountable. That started driving up the results. Then the last thing was really creating this vision of the company, which is about a noble purpose, that it's not just about, we're not in the business of office products, but I focused in on the whole small business thing, that half of, I think, America's non-farm GDP comes from small businesses. Small businesses, entrepreneurs, and our whole thing was, if we can become the backbone of small businesses and really help and spur them grow, we're helping America grow. So whether it's a frontline associate or a manager, this whole thing that it started giving them a noble purpose, that what we're all about is helping America grow. And that galvanized the whole company behind a single purpose. And now that we had a clear strategy, we focused on execution and really started moving the dial. And our digital business really took off. We were growing double digits. In fact, in 2012, during holiday, when in the past our website would have always crashed, we were rated as the #1 website with the fastest response time, faster than Amazon and Walmart. So a lot because of my digital team. So I think that turnaround was really very, very exciting, because, and once you start getting success, that galvanizes people to
That
go
turnaround
forward.
occurred from '08 to 11?
No, I got in 10 and we started the turnaround in 11.
11, okay.
And we spent 11 really getting the strategy in place.
Yeah.
12 was our year of
Yeah.
execution.
If you can talk about this, what was the motive for the merger between Office Depot and OfficeMax? And how do you see the office products, office service business developing over the next 5 or 10 years?
So in terms of, as we were doing the turnaround, what I found was, look, we had a great team, great strategy, great execution, but you had such strong headwinds because the secular declines. So when whole categories, when you've got paper declining at 2-3%, when you have, therefore, ink and toner starts declining, when you have so many categories declining, it was just very tough. I felt that our efforts to results were not commensurate. And to me, it was a simple economic argument. Even though the OfficeMax was $7 billion, Depot was 11, together were 18 billion in revenues. Together we made about 250 million in EBIT. And just our back of the envelope work said the synergies were probably about 400 to 600 million. So the synergies alone were double to triple that of what we were making together, which is what a lot of analysts and everyone had been saying. And for 20 years, this had been talked about. So I felt for the long-term viability of the companies, that really the only thing that made sense was to really merge and bring the companies so that we could get the synergies. And the other thing was, as we were driving a lot of the innovation moves, we put a lot of new small stores. Our average store was about 25,000 square feet. I put stores which were like 5,000 and so on. And so we found that we didn't have the marketing dollars to really push those. So the synergies, I felt, hey, if we could really start reinvesting some of the synergies behind these innovation efforts, the combined company would be a more effective competitor, especially with the changed competitive landscape with Amazon and Walmart and Costco. So that was the whole reason why I felt that we should go forward with the merger. And we did a true merger of equals, even though we're 7 billion, they were 11 billion, but at one point our market caps became the same. And so I thought it's great for our shareholders. Our shareholders are very, very appreciative, and I think they did pretty well. In terms of your other question about the future, look, that's
I guess what I'm mostly interested in too is how virtual is that business going to become? Right, because you have Amazon on one end and, well, I guess Walmart on the other end.
Yeah.
And you're even building some smaller stores too. So I'm kind of curious about what the distribution network's going to look like.
I think that there's no question that digital's a very big part of that. But in order for brick and mortar stores, which I'm still a big believer in, is what you've got to do in these retail stores is you've got to create experiences, which is why we reposition them as services. And we started creating in our stores where, for small businesses, we could do websites for them. We could do cloud solutions for them. We could do minor IT solutions in their home offices, etc. So the whole gamut of things, even accounting, we started looking at legal stuff, HR. And so the experience you create in a store where it becomes interactive and there's no substitute for that. Then you have a reason for being. If all you're doing is selling commodity products, which are cheaper than when you go to internet, that's when you have the whole effect of people just come in, look at your thing, and then go buy it on Amazon. So I think, but there's no question, and when we started doing digital, we also started offering services on the digital. I think the trick is the companies, and this I speak for all retailers, are ones who can master all channels. The buzzword is omni-channel or multi-channel, but really how you leverage those. And rather than looking at retail as purely brick and mortar, as really looking at all channels available to you. Because today's consumer is saying, hey, treat me special no matter where I shop, when I shop, how I shop. And I'm going to give the loyalty to the brands who recognize me no matter where I am. And if you create experiences for me, that's when I'll give you my loyalty.
I see. Got it. You touched on this earlier, but I wanted to ask you this question very specifically. OfficeMax is regarded as having one of the most progressive ethical and compliance policies of any U.S. firm, and you mentioned the importance of this in the international environment. Could you speak more broadly about why you think that's important for a company like OfficeMax, and what kind of responsibilities you think public companies have beyond shareholders and more broadly to society?
Yeah, I think to me it's not about just OfficeMax. To me, any company. To me, it is, look, sometimes business gets a bad name because of excesses of a few, but by and large, there are a lot of very good and great companies in America. And for me, it's having spent 5 years in different countries, and I just feel it's very important to do business in an ethical way. And that has nothing to do with being American, being Chinese. I just have always felt if you're an associate of a company, you always feel better if you can sleep well at night, where your managers are not telling you to do things that you shouldn't be doing. And that has always been my philosophy. And people go with this whole excuse of, yeah, but this is Korea, or but this is China, or this is India, and things are not done that way. And I think that's hogwash and nonsense, because doing business ethically is just the right thing to do. And I think long term, it really creates a great culture in the company. But it's hard work. And it's not just something that you can say, I'll appeal to the altruistic sense of my associates. You've got to have constant education. And the internet's been a great thing because so for instance, one of the things when I ran Aramark International, we put a whole web-based thing on FCPA training, Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. And this is where the FCPA in the US doesn't allow you to bribe government officials. And all my top 150 executives, so every year we would meet somewhere, and they had to do the full FCPA training. If they didn't, they wouldn't be allowed in the conference. And I would personally get a report on who had not done it, and I'd write to them saying, you're not coming in. So it's that sort of monitoring. So in China, for instance, there's a common custom that during Chinese New Year, everyone gives sweets. So we managed a lot of hospitals in China, and it's customary to get sweets. And I was saying, fine, and a lot of them are government hospitals. Right. But I say, give the sweets, but I wanted to keep a record of everything and send to our general counsel. And it was just discipline. It was a small thing, but it just says we take it very seriously. And I just think it's a good thing to do.
Interesting. The students are going to ask questions here shortly, and there are microphones that you can queue up at. Before they do, I just want to ask the last question, which is, a lot of these students are thinking about starting their business careers. Is there any bit of advice, one or two key things that you would suggest that they do in order to have the kind of careers that you've had?
I'd say a few things. First, always disregard all advice that's given by people, because you have to follow your own path and what works for you. But having said that, given that I have now gray hair or almost no hair, I guess I get some credibility in giving you some words of wisdom. I'd say a few things. One is a word of advice I got from one of my Korean direct reports when I did a 360-degree feedback. He said, Saligram, he said, you're all about the American way. You always single out the superstars. You just want to recognize the superstars. And he said, you're no longer a brand manager. You're running a company. And in a company, there's people, most of them are average, just by the nature that it's a company and there's a lot of people. He said, your job is to take people who are average and make them above average. Because in total, you'll get a lot more impact on the company. And when I've gone into service businesses, that's had a huge impact on me. At Aramark, I had 110,000 frontline associates around the world. And how you impact a frontline associate, or in a hotel, a bellman, and how you inspire them and get them to feel that there is some purpose, I think sort of is very important, because all of us, there's that syndrome of the hotshot MBA who goes in and wants to conquer the world, which is all good. But over time, people respect you not because they want you to make them look good, not you to look good for yourself.
Right.
And so it's very important to be ambitious, be dynamic, and be driven. But if you're not a team player, and if you're not about making the whole team win, if it's all about me, and I want to succeed at the expense of others, sooner or later you'll have a downfall. So that would be my 2 cents worth.
Outstanding. Thanks, Ravi. Can we start over here? Are there? Oh, please.
I'll ask the
And
first question.
just, by the way, I probably didn't say this. If you have a question, just queue up at one of the mics and we'll get to you, please. If you could just say your name.
Yes. Hi, Mr. Saligram. I'm Matt. I'm a sophomore marketing major. My question is, obviously your career's had a lot of international aspects. You've worked in a number of different countries. I was wondering, like, from a management perspective, do you think you brought a different mindset into each environment you've worked in, or just had a general mindset that has made you successful in that aspect?
Look, that's a great question. I think whenever you go into a country, what I've found is that human beings are human beings, that 80% is usually similar, 20% is different in terms of even businesses. It's figuring out what is that 20% that's different. And typically, whenever you go into an international market, a lot of times it's because of ego, because of chauvinism. People always say, but we're different. And there's also this thing about the NIH, the not invented here syndrome. And and foreign subs typically do not like the headquarters because they think it's seagulls who parachute on them. And unfortunately, in many cases that's true. Because when people from headquarters go in there, they just want to go, beat them up. And typically in Korea, we always found that people always came during Christmas time from headquarters because they wanted to shop. And because at that time it was a great place. So, or they wanted to get away because the climate was better. So you want to make sure you're adding value, but trying to integrate them as part of the whole company. And when I ran Aramark, one of the things I found was that initially it was a Commonwealth of Independent States, and each country CEO ran it as their own fiefdom. And so we made it into a Commonwealth of Interdependent States and really tried to make them part of the company and make them feel proud of it. And so that's very important, I think. But there is a 20% difference, and you just have to find out what is it that makes them tick and why is that different.
Over here, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Matthew Bach, and I'm a civil engineering major. This question goes back to some of the first with regard to personal characteristics. Excuse me. What qualities helped you overcome difficulties and challenges? More importantly, what helped you persevere through them?
Okay, so Matthew, I think your question was, what were the qualities that helped me persevere and challenge through my career? Well, look, I think first of all, it's being very realistic about who you are and what you are. God clearly didn't give me a Robert Redford face, and I'm known more for my width than my height. So I didn't have the square jaw and the handsome good looks, and so you figure out, okay, rather than bemoaning that, what is it that differentiates you? And so for me, one of my strengths has always been I was a good speaker. And so you work on those aspects, and how do you, and also with your team members, how do you help them so that when you're a foreigner in a country, when I first came in, it's always their suspicion, why is this guy here? Is he going to take our job away? And how do you integrate yourself? And so I remember when I was at Leo Burnett, some guy came and put a newspaper article about some house, some sect in India ate rats or worshiped rats, and he was trying to belittle me on that whole thing. And so at first I got very angry, and then I said, hey, if I get angry, he'll win. So I just went to him and said, look, I didn't really appreciate it, but let me just tell you, India is a country of 1 billion people. There's a lot of people. I'm a vegetarian. I really don't eat rats. So there's no point in you putting that up. So if you've got an issue with me, talk to me. So I think it is really you have to deal with the cards you're dealt. And you've got to have faith in yourself. The most important thing is self-belief. And really, and for me, I've been very lucky to have a very supportive family because I've moved countries, and my wife has, she was a star in her own right, but she followed me everywhere. So the importance of a great family who's supportive cannot be underestimated.
Thank you. Please, over there.
Hi, my name is Clark. I wanted to ask you about how you think your undergraduate degree in engineering, if that sort of changed any of the way you've led or managed compared to like your peers throughout your career.
So it's a funny story about my getting a degree in engineering. Look, I grew up in India at a time, and I think it's not that different now, when the marks or the grades you got determined what you got in. And when I was growing up, engineering, electrical engineering at that time, and medicine were really the two hottest subjects. What I wanted to do was literature and go into literature honors because I always fancied I'd be a writer. And so I was 14 when I graduated from high school, I wanted to go into literature, and my parents and all my family said, no, you'll end up being a auto rickshaw driver, a three-wheeler, and they said, you'll never have any prospects. So I did go to one class, and it also happened all the students were women, and unfortunately at that time I was not mature enough. Looking back, I should have gone into that class, but so I went and did engineering instead because that's where I'd got in. But I knew I had a problem when in the second semester English was my favorite subject, and then business or engineering economics. So I couldn't wait to get my engineering done. But I had to do well because India was such a place when you have so many people, you're so competitive, and I wanted to come to the States. So I had to do well even though I hated engineering. But looking back, I think it really created a good analytical framework. So a lot of how I approach problems in terms of being logical and stuff like that. Of course, my wife bemoans the fact that I still can't screw on a light bulb. So, what do you do?
Thank you.
Interesting. Please.
Hi, Mr. Saligram. Thank you for coming. I have a question a little bit more about your ethics. You talked a lot about them. As a leader, how do you kind of take that really abstract concept of ethics and help trickle it down into your firm?
That's really a great question. And for me, like with Korea, when we had that, I remember that so vividly when my management team, and we've had the factory fire, these guys are saying, you just don't understand Korea. And there's just an inner being in you which says, maybe it was my upbringing, maybe it was, but for me it was always, it was hateful to give a bribe. And in my personal life. In fact, in my marks card where my birthday is, the school printed the date incorrectly. And this was when I was in high school, and I wanted to go get the thing corrected. And they said, no, you have to give a bakshish to change it. And I said no. So till today, my wrong birthday has been entered because I didn't want to do that. So I think there is some convictions about what's right and what's wrong. And I think what applies in your personal life applies in business. There is, so you just have to have the courage of your convictions to say, look, how you treat people, because ethics and values are sort of at a continuum. And at OfficeMax, I also had a rule, which I publicly announced, that in OfficeMax, there were no jerks and no AHs. And that we just didn't allow them. Because for me, I had worked for a lot of tough bosses, a lot of people who were jerks. And I promised myself when I was CEO that I'd create a company where that to get ahead, you didn't have to be nasty. that you didn't have to push the other person down. And I just believed in that passionately. And you know, my employees resonated with that. So, and fortunately, because I worked for 3 great companies, Aramark, Leo Burnett, and S.C. Johnson, where those sorts of values were instilled, this great thing about people advocacy, I just was able to practice that.
As a matter of advice, would you tell students to take great care with the companies they take jobs with and make sure that the ethics of the companies match their own personal ethics? I
absolutely would say so, because I think the reputation of the company, your first job especially, and you know, there's a recruiter, Jim Citron, who's written a book about this in terms of how you build your career. Working for blue chip companies that have strong values, strong ethical foundations, I think is very important. And because especially your first and second jobs, they have a huge imprint on you. And you learn a lot because you don't know it, but subliminally you're absorbing a lot without your knowing, and about how you build corporate cultures. So if you're in a company where using foul language is pretty common, berating people is pretty common, then you sort of take that into your own management style because that's the only thing you grew up on. So for me at S.C. Johnson, you know, we didn't use bad words. At Aramark, you just didn't use bad words. So those were, and it was not a law, it was not published anywhere, it was just part of the culture. And those, I think that gives you a lot of satisfaction because then you say, hey, it's not just the job, but what you're doing, your life has some meaning.
Thank you.
Please go there.
Hi, my name is Ethan, and my question, I just wanted to ask you, so you've been talking a lot about putting the team, being a team player and putting the team ahead of yourself, but I just want to know, in all of your years as a businessman, if you've ever had to put or do what's best for yourself or put yourself in front of the team, whether it was for your family or just your own benefit.
It's an interesting, so I'll give you an example right now with the merger. And I was a big proponent of it. I was the biggest champion in the company. And one of the biggest challenges I had was how do I keep the whole company intact and not lose people during the merger. And so I'd constantly do town halls and talk about why this merger was so good and so on and so forth. And interestingly, during the course of this, I got a couple of, in fact, several calls to be CEO of other firms. And some were very, very exciting opportunities. And some that I had dreamt of doing and said, wow, I'd give my eye teeth to get that job. But for me, I had a moral obligation to see this through. And so it was a very difficult decision because on one hand, I have to also think of my family and my future and stuff. And it's always easier to get a job when you're in a job, even for CEOs, trust me. But I felt I had a moral obligation to the team because I had been on a soapbox telling them about it. So I chose not to go to those and to see the job through. In terms of other times, look, I have, in my 35 years, I worked for only 5 companies. So, you know, my first one, 5.5, 11 at S.C. Johnson, 8 in Aramark and Intercontinental, and 3 at OfficeMax. So I've had long spells. There are times when you leave when you either feel you outlived your usefulness and you've done everything you can. Like at Aramark, I had really built up the international business. My ambition was to be CEO. But I didn't do this clandestinely. I went to my boss, Joe Neubauer, and when this OfficeMax opportunity came up, I actually went and told him, even before I interviewed. And I sought his blessing, and I said, look, Joe, I've done everything I can for you here, and I don't think, you know, because he was not ready to leave, and sought his help to get this. So it's always better when, so this was something where I was still able to do something for myself, but the whole team was rooting for me to get the job. So being transparent, and when you're transparent and you conduct yourself with integrity, it's funny that you don't need to make you don't need to make the trade-offs, but sometimes you do, like I did during the merger.
Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Ryan Morris. I'm a junior MIS major. I have two questions for you. First one's about personality, and the second one's about business strategy. My first question for you is, what is your favorite office supply?
I love pens. And yeah, this is all because probably I fancied myself to be a novelist and stuff. So I love pens, I love fountain pens, but I love our OfficeMax has a pen called Tool, T-U-L, which is one of the most innovative pens. And it is a great design. And in fact, it is a great example of taking the Tool brand and extending it. We got it into staplers, and in fact, launched a Tool chair and stuff. So.
Cool. And my second question for you is that you mentioned earlier how paper sales were declining 2 to 3% every year. How has that affected your business over the years, and how did you and OfficeMax react to that kind of change in culture in the consumer?
Yeah, as I said earlier, a lot of the categories, and with paper being the central one, started declining. And so for us, the whole thing was finding new categories. And how do you get into new categories or driving innovation in existing categories? So for instance, the whole thing with masking tape and the innovations that have been created there in terms of using we started marketing it to teenagers, and it's now become a big fashion thing. And where people, in fact, Project Runway had a whole fashion show with dresses made out of this and stuff. But also our whole evolution of getting into services was really that, was how do you get into, because products, a lot of the there was a commoditization that was going on. So how do you get into it? But also looking at new channels, like going into the whole digital side.
Thank you.
Please.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for visiting with us today. It's been really great to hear your story. My question for you is, in the business school, we learn a lot about, through case studies, about different visionary managers and how when they change businesses, especially in corporations as large as OfficeMax, there's a lot of resistance to the change. So when you were trying to revitalize the business, I could imagine there was a lot of maybe resistance to really kind of revitalizing the strategy. So my question is, how did you break down those barriers, and how did you empower the current people working at the company to believe in what you had to offer and to get on your side, so to speak?
I'll give two examples. One is at OfficeMax. It was because there was such a strong retail culture in the company and going after individual consumers, trying to create this whole notion of going after the business customer was very important, and to launch the whole strategic plan. So what I did was create a lot of teams, working teams, on different aspects, work streams, on initiatives. So we had about 150 managers or so at different levels working on the strategy. So when finally the strategy was done, it was not Ravi Saligram's strategy. It was this team strategy, and they felt a great sense of ownership. So it's very important that you give ownership to your teams. You can have the vision, you have to be the chief cheerleader for it, but you've got to get people to have ownership. And then you've got to find mechanisms to cascade the vision. And you've got to make it simple for your frontline associates. So this whole notion of we could come up with complex strategies at the executive level, but for a frontline associate, what resonates is about small business. Hey, we're the backbone of America. If you help small businesses, you help America grow. And therefore, you are actually part of that. That makes a frontline associate, it's easy and simple to understand. For me, one of the great lessons was, I think you've all heard the story about when the Kennedy era, when they were trying to put a man on the moon. At NASA, they were interviewing, and they interviewed this janitor. And they asked the janitor, what's your job? And he didn't say he was sweeping floors. He said it's to put a man on the moon. That's the kind of thing you need to get in, especially in frontline businesses, is where you get your associates to feel part of the overall purpose. And when they feel that, they do remarkable things. So at SC Johnson Korea, one of the whole things was the big brother was Japan Johnson. It was the huge subsidiary, Korea was the small one. So for me, it was, we could never become their size, but I said to the whole company, we'll become better than Japan Johnson, and no one believed it. So I said, look, in order to provide proof points, I said one day they will pick one of our Korean executives and make them head a division in Japan Johnson. And no one believed it because, you know, there's the whole tension between Japan and Korea. But lo and behold, in 3 years, Pilyok Lee, one of my marketing managers, went and headed the insecticide group in Japan. So it's all about when you create that sort of a thing and you create hope and optimism and a powerful vision of the future, that's when your associates get inspired. And then it's not you alone. You have the power of 30,000 associates or 100,000 associates who are exponentially driving your vision to success.
Thank you.
Last question, please.
Good evening, Mr. Saligram. Who's been your greatest influences?
A few different ones. My grandfather that I grew up with had a tremendous influence on me because his standards of integrity were very, very high. And my father, who was Brigadier General in the Army, he started the first school of management in the College of Military Engineering, so I wanted to get into management. So, but a lot of my influences have been the people that I have worked with, the people below me, the people above me, but more the people below me, because I've learned a lot more from my teams, and I'm a big believer in feedback, in 360-degree feedback, and always getting this feedback because you think you're great, but you come across quite differently. Even as CEO, I had a whole feedback session done, and it was interesting. One of the pieces of feedback and I had done it at different levels, they came back to me and said, Saligram, you never talk in the elevators. You always look grim. And it was interesting because this was something I had learned at Leo Burnett, where things were like loose lips sink ships, and you never talked in elevators. But now that I was CEO, I didn't understand that the impact I had. If I didn't smile, people thought there was something wrong with the company, or people thought I was unfriendly. So I started making it a real point to become very good at trite conversation about how's the weather, how's the football game, getting people engaged, and whether it's in the cafeteria line. But that's very important for a leader that, you know, as a CEO, you're on 24/7, and you're radiating messages. So those people below me have taught me a lot to be a better leader. So at least they've taught me it's no good being a jerk. So.
Outstanding. Charlie, could you come up and conclude the program, please? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dean Gilligan and Mr. Saligram. Thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to come and speak with our students. I know that we will be able to take your lessons and apply them into our own lives. As a token of our appreciation, the Undergraduate Business Council would like to present Mr. Saligram with this personalized Stetson cowboy hat in recognition of your participation in the VIP Distinguished Speaker Series.
Oh, wow. Thank you so very much. You know, I always admired Clint Eastwood, so this is something, this is great. Is this the right way? Great. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Do the hook 'em again? Remember?
Oh, right. Did I get this? No.
There you go.
Okay. Thanks. Thank you very much. Onwards and upwards, and thanks to your kind hospitality, Tom, and to all the members, Charlie and Claudia, who picked me up, and Todd and Mandy. Thank you all very much indeed. Great.
Thank you a lot.